Hi again. So in my last video, I answered the question, how do the blind and visually impaired manage to use computers since they are such a visual thing? And we tackled there the idea of screen reading software, and in particular, one that I favour, called JAWS for Windows, which, as I said in the last video, was made by a company called Freedom Scientific and stands for Job Access with Speech for Windows. Now, I said in the previous video that there are some problems, and I'm going to address a big one right now. And that is, well, frankly, it's the problem of accountability. You see, again, I can't speak, as I've said in other videos, for other people's experiences or what the situation is like in countries outside of Australia. But here where I am, in Australia, there are a series of service providers for the blind and visually impaired. The Christian Blind Mission, Guide Dogs Australia or Victoria, and Vision Australia. Now, the one who most commonly helps market JAWS and various bits of other equipment to the blind and visually impaired is Vision Australia, and that is because Freedom Scientific are a partner of Vision Australia. They're sort of semi-independent, semi-connected. It's a symbiotic relationship, a bit like Venom. And just like that movie, there are as many fans as people who loathe it, even if the people who loathe it are generally asked to just keep quiet. And I'm one of those, and I'll explain why. You see, as I said, JAWS for Windows is often produced as a shareware product. That is to say, you can go onto a web page, type in a code, and download it for free. Many people do this every single month. And, when you've got heaps of people doing this every month, every year, year in, year out, and then you've got people having it mailed to them on a disk. Look, at the end of the day, if you know much about computing, you'll know that when that much duplication is happening, data errors can and will occur. It's just a fact. Now, that is unfortunate, it's regrettable, but it's how it is. And so you'd think, that being the case, that if a client of Vision Australia were to contact them and say, hey guys, look, I'm using my latest download, and here's what's going on, insert list of problems below, the response from the IT department would be to say, yes, okay, fine, please send us that in an email, and they would get onto it very, very quickly and make sure that all of those data errors were corrected so that the next batch of free downloads didn't have those data errors, and that the client could have something sent to them that wasn't causing them problems. You'd think it'd be almost conveyor belt level of efficiency. After all, this is one of the main service providers for the blind and visually impaired in Australia, and they are in a symbiotic relationship with the company who makes JAWS for Windows. You'd think that's what would be happening, but if you are thinking that, you'd be wrong. And I can tell you that categorically because 3 years ago, I received a JAWS disk in the mail. I put it into my computer, all of the correct codes were typed in, and JAWS was installed successfully onto the laptop. About a week later, I realised the voice didn't sound right. It was coming out gravelly, like it was going through a ring modulator. Shortly thereafter, it was looping back over itself. And about a month after that, I noticed that the speakers were fading in and out, but only while JAWS was being used. You turn JAWS off, and each and every one of those audio problems I described just evaporated like a Welsh mist, or, the hopes and dreams of Shia LaBeouf. Now, why that's significant is because it means it can't be blamed on the speakers of the computer. It wasn't an error with the actual, the hardware, it was a software issue. And I had JAWS installed by somebody who knew computing very, very well. I contacted Vision Australia, and what I got told by a person whose name I shall suppress was that JAWS was an infallible program. I'll say that again, infallible program, incapable of glitching or error, and that if you can successfully install it on your computer, then there can be nothing wrong with it. The only person who could say that about JAWS is a person who either knows nothing about computing, is lying to a client to keep them happy, or a complete prick taking advantage of the disabled to make sure that there is a market to sell shit to. And what's worse is I made sure to ignore that person, go to a bunch of other people, make as much noise about it as possible, and hoped that therefore this would get sorted out. Well, here I am 3 years later, a couple of computers on, so it can't even be said it's the same device I'm using the program on. And in fact, JAWS have had several updates since then. And guess what, boys and girls? All 3 of those audio problems exist, plus 1 or 2 extras thrown in for good measure. What I'm getting at is it doesn't matter how good your computer program is, or even what the hell your computer program is. If you're going to ignore problems, then the problems aren't going to go away. In fact, if you're producing it en masse, they are going, guaranteed, to duplicate. And if your job is to provide shit for the blind and visually impaired, then you're in a lot of trouble, because apart from the fact that you should probably be praying for your soul by now, if such a amorphous entity exists, there's a lot of people in the society that we live in who aren't going to think very highly of you. Like, that is taking advantage 101. And it also begs questions as to whether the IT department at Vision Australia is actually an IT department or a marketing firm. Because all that they did when I reported this wasn't actually to try to fix the problem, but to try to shut me up and bury it. And 3 years later, yeah, they haven't done a damn thing to fix it. So yeah, JAWS has its problems. All programs have their problems. Often it's ignorance, often it's the user, often it's compatibility, but one that is utterly unforgivable no matter what the program is you're using is the people whose job it is to repair things, to fix things, to design things, to install things, pretending like things are infallible, are perfect, or worse than that, having a problem pointed to right in front of them and shoving their heads in the sand and pretending that it's going to go away. That is entirely unforgivable.